Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Well, it looks like the United States is sending another arm package to the Ukrainians. At this point, the United States does not know how much money it has handed over to the Ukrainians, both in terms of hard currency, loans, and then obviously military weapons. It is unknown. The accounting and oversight of the continued war effort by the United States to assist the Ukrainians obviously is measured in the billions and billions and billions and more billions. So what is the United States getting ready to send now? So first, 22 million rounds of small arms ammunition, more than 30 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, and 25 Stryker armored personnel carriers, probably to replace the Bradleys and Strykers that were destroyed in the now defunct Ukrainian summer offensive. Additionally, 155mm artillery rounds, 105mm artillery rounds, mines, anti-mine clearing breaching devices and vehicles, and a host of anti-tank guided weapon systems, including AT-4s and Javelins. Our understanding now that there is a direct production run of Javelin systems that are then being sent directly to Ukraine. Essentially, right now, it doesn't look like the United States is producing Javelins for itself. They're producing Javelins for the Ukrainians. Interesting. That's a little bit concerning if something were to happen elsewhere in the world and the United States would need a robust anti-tank capability. Well, obviously a lot of those weapon systems have been turned over to the Ukrainians, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of them. And the same goes with the British as well. The British have essentially turned over its entire stockpile of anti-tank guided weapon systems, in a range of anti-tank guided weapon systems, to the Russians. So what's happening on the battlefield today? Well, over the last 24 hours, we have seen a heavy uptick in the use of Russian air power and long-range rocket systems, to include Iskanders and guided S-300 systems attacking targets along the front line and behind the Ukrainian lines as well. We have seen large attacks take place in Kramatorsk and around Kramatorsk. We have seen Russian Su-25s. We have seen Russian Su-34 fullbacks in operation over various sites in Ukraine. And we anticipate that the Russians could be preparing and are shaping the battlefield for a possible rather large ground operation. We've been talking about this for some time now. We're looking very closely west of Lysychansk, north of Seversk, as these Russian forces continue their buildup. The Russian army continues to restructure and expand. Again, at this point, there is no reliable information on the size and scope of that expansion. We just know with absolute certainty the Russian military right now is much bigger than what it was at the start of this conflict. And in all probability, it will continue to grow and expand and get larger as the war continues. The Ukrainian offensive. We're trying to get information about a report of a Ukrainian operation that took place in Kherson. we cannot verify that a Ukrainian amphibious landing took place. We believe it's possible that Ukrainian forces conducted an amphibious raid on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River. Have the Ukrainians taken control of any territory on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River? We don't believe so. We believe the Ukrainians landed, flew the flag, and then departed. Now, this has been going on for some period of time with the Ukrainian Marines, Special Operations Forces, even localized territorial forces in civilian craft have conducted operations on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River. But have we seen the necessary movement of heavy equipment, bridging equipment, to sustain a heavy force in the field on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River? And the answer to that is, beyond a shadow of a doubt, no. It has not taken place. Now, if we look back around springtime and we look at the rhetoric that was coming out of Ukrainian content provider sites, Ukrainian media sites, talking about what was next in this upcoming offensive operation. We had heard reports that it was going to be designed to move south and obviously sever the land corridor from Russia proper, severing the land corridor into Crimea. And among those goals was first the seizure of Tokmak, followed by the eventual seizure of Melitopol, Berdyansk, and then finally Mariupol. We believe that the Ukrainian military objective was the seizure of those 4 towns and cities, and thus severing that land corridor. Now, have the Ukrainians even come close to achieving any of those objectives? Unfortunately for the Ukrainian side, the answer to that is no. What's more concerning for the Ukrainians is that the main defensive lines of the Russian military that essentially were about 13 kilometers, 14 kilometers south of the line of contact, south of the gray zone. None of those main lines, none of those main defensive lines were at any time threatened by Ukrainian forces. Unfortunately for the Ukrainians, they have remained tied up in these kill boxes where Russian artillery, Russian air support, Russian aircraft are able to pound these Ukrainian forces. Now, is that a good place to be if you're a Ukrainian? It is not. Again, the Ukrainians were looking to be much deeper south, looking to be penetrating Russian lines and disrupting Russian artillery 14, 20, 30, 40 kilometers behind the main line of contact. None of that has been done. The Russian Air Force, again, as we talked about, going into this offensive operation by the Ukrainians. And again, we believe there were elements in Ukraine, elements in NATO states that were saying, look, hit the pause button here. This is probably not going to be successful. What you're attempting to do, what you, the Ukrainian military, is attempting to do has never been done before. There has never been a military force that has been able to conduct a large-scale offensive operation in which they don't have air superiority or even much of an air force to speak of. Are the Ukrainians conducting limited strikes against Russian forces with storm shadows? A few sorties being conducted by the Ukrainians? Yes, there are. They are doing that. But the Russians are able to have aircraft over the battlefield at leisure. And we've seen them be able to call in strikes, call in attack helicopters, call in ground support aircraft, and not to mention just the massive amounts of artillery that the Russians are able to use. So it was really a non-starter to begin with, and I'm really surprised that the Ukrainians went ahead with said operation. There was some thought process that they weren't going to do it. It was just a ruse, but they did it. They launched this operation, and it just didn't work. Now, is there continued fighting going on? Yes, absolutely there is. They're trying to. The Ukrainians are kind of trying to salvage what's happening by still conducting operations, taking little small villages here and there, and that is then being messaged in a way, a narrative that creates a perception that the Ukrainians are still conducting this large-scale offensive operation, and it's just going a lot slower than originally planned. But that's not what's happening. At this point, the Ukrainian leadership, the generals in NATO, fully understand that this offensive didn't work. And it's back to the drawing board. And again, as I've talked about before, it's either going to be supply the Ukrainians with an air force or accept the status quo. And there are large elements within Ukraine, within the West, that what I would call low information minds. They're looking at this and they're saying, well, there's no way the Ukrainians will accept a frozen conflict. We can't let the Russians take this territory that they've already taken. We can't let them hold on to it. There is a military solution for this. And I don't believe there is if you're on the Ukrainian side of the equation. I don't believe you have a military solution to taking back what you see under the control right now of the Russians. And then to make it even more just absolutely ridiculous is this thought that the Ukrainians are going to retake the Crimean Peninsula. I mean, you're really going for a stretch there. Again, that was what was being talked about, a march into the Crimea. And right now, the Ukrainians are finding it very difficult to get to the first main line of Russian defense. Think about that for a second. Digest that for a second. If you want to provide data, information on how this could eventually be successful for the Ukrainians, love to hear it in the comment section. But based on what I know and based on what I'm seeing, I'm not seeing that. I don't think and I don't believe that this offensive operation by the Ukrainians was viable in terms of producing a successful outcome of military objectives. And again, those military objectives was penetrate Russian lines of defense, get into rear areas, seize control of Tokmak, Melitopol, Berdyansk, and eventually make its way down to Mariupol. Didn't happen. Not going to happen. So that's kind of where we set for today. Again, we're watching these Russian airstrikes, cruise missile strikes, Iskander missile strikes, Su-34 fullback strikes, all across the line of contact, deep behind Ukrainian lines. And again, the losses that we are hearing about from the Ukrainian side right now is heavy. And the Ukrainians right now are in fact taking more losses than the Russians are. Why do you ask that? Why do you say that? Well, because the Ukrainians don't have the ability, don't have the air force to strike at the Russians as the Russians are striking against the Ukrainians right now. Just fact. So that's kind of where we sit. We're watching things very, very closely. We continue to watch the operations near Bakhmut. Again, Bakhmut is still under the control of Russian forces. There doesn't seem to be a viable offensive capacity by the Ukrainians to envelop and seize control of Bakhmut or retake Bakhmut. And definitely in the south, as we had just talked about. Thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. And as always, have a good day.